Now, obviously, we know the big game is this Monday, the national championship. That's right. It's all led to this point. Michigan versus Washington. And who better to bring in for a Saturday special than a guy we've brought on a lot to talk Michigan controversy, Michigan contracts, Michigan contacts, and Connor Stallions, author, host of the Steve Deace Show, producer. The man's got a bag deeper than Santa Claus. Our good friend, Michigan fan, Steve Deace. Steve, what is up, brother?
Happy New Year and a hearty go blue to all of you. How are you?
Doing great.
Quite
man.
well.
Yeah.
I'd say well.
Code's
to quite,
Code's
well
yeah,
to
Code's
quite
in a bad
well,
spot.
Steve. Yes.
Well, Steve, I obviously want to start with just overall how you're feeling. Been a while since Michigan was in a national championship game. There's been a lot of stuff on the periphery, obviously a lot of stuff that's affected the on-the-field play of Michigan, but they've been able to not only survive, but thrive. Just how are you feeling? 30,000-foot view, getting ready for Monday night.
I mean, I'm just extremely excited and proud as a Michigan fan. And I think one of the underrated things that has been discussed a lot within this team and hasn't come up very much and is probably very surprising given the overall bent of the university, which David would know well, is how much faith has played a role with this team and been part of the shared experience of bonding and building this team. And if you follow high-profile players like Blake Corum and J.J. McCarthy on social media, for example, they are not shy about discussing it. Jimmy's never been shy about it. And neither is Sharon Moore and many other elements of the team. And so I think beyond just these are great players, the caliber of young men that make up this team, it's also exemplary. It's been an incredible ride. It's been an incredible story. And it's kind of fitting we come now here to the end and really the two most dominant units all year long in college football, Washington's offense and Michigan's defense, are going to decide this on the field here. And it's probably going to actually be how the other matchup goes.
That's true.
Michigan's offense versus Washington's defense that will actually determine how this wins or who wins. And if you look back at the Rose Bowl, and guys, if you ever get a chance to go there for a game, I know, David, you were there, I think, is on the 06 team. Were you there?
Yes, sir.
On that team?
Yes, sir.
It's incredible. I mean, it's the last bastion of what I call old California, where California just took Americana and added glitz and glamour to it and didn't try to destroy Americana, which is what New California is doing. Okay. But it's a once in a lifetime setting. But if you watch that game, it basically was old Alabama, Nick Saban versus new Alabama, Nick Saban. It was the Trent Richardson, Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram, Alabama versus the Tua, Jalen Hurts, Jalen Milroe, quarterback-driven Alabama. And what you saw, if you were there, in terms of eye test, there was no difference. I mean, Alabama's got more five-star recruits than the entire Big Ten Conference does as a whole. You couldn't tell a difference at all. Why? The way that Michigan's engineered its program, when everyone went with NIL and said, let's give a bunch of money to 17-year-old kids. Michigan said, let's give a bunch of money to 21-year-old grown-ass men and let them play here when they're 22, 23 grown-ass men. And so, for example, there's a young man on Alabama's team, Caden Proctor, 5-star, about an hour from where I live in Des Moines is where he grew up. And when he's 26 years old, he's going to be a better he'll be a better NFL offensive lineman probably than Trevor Keegan will be. But the problem is we're not playing this game 4 or 5 years from now. We're playing it now. And 22-year-old Trevor Keegan in Ben Herbert's program for 4 years is a hell of a lot better offensive lineman than 5-star prospect Caden Proctor is right now, who couldn't hold his water against a 235-pound transfer from Coastal Carolina on the most important play of Alabama's season. And I think what you're seeing Michigan do is what programs in college basketball have done to combat what Kentucky does in recruiting and programs like that: get old and stay old. And so Michigan is saying to its second and third day draft picks, stay in school. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Harbaugh's from the NFL. I don't want to give rookies a bunch of money anyway. That disrupts the locker room. You guys have seen plenty of that in the SEC. Instead, we're going to pay the guys who have produced. And we tell guys, you come here, you produce, you develop, you'll get paid too. And Michigan has just built a program that its players now look like Alabama's players. They're just 2 or 3 years older across the board.
Yeah, no, Steve, I agree 100% with basically everything you said. You know, when I look at this Michigan team, and you talked about faith, and obviously having that chemistry, regardless of where you get it from in what is the ultimate team sport in the game of football, is massive. But I think Michigan, and this is a credit to Jim Harbaugh and a credit to the culture and chemistry that they have, they've taken the adversity that they've faced and they've parlayed it together to make themselves better. I think this has actually improved this Michigan team. It's one thing to be told and have to manipulate yourself to believe something, right? Like anybody who believes that men and women should play sports together, you have obviously had to do some mental manipulation or gymnastics to get to that point. With Jim Harbaugh, there was no creating adversity out of thin air. They were literally getting adversity coal shoveled into the Titanic furnace of the football team. It seemed week after week after week, controversy through controversy through controversy, which I think is a credit to that team. But when I look at that Michigan-Alabama matchup, and we've broken it down, we've talked about it a ton, but the great thing about a great game, it's you never can stop finding out things that happen to it because there's so many small turning points. I was very surprised that Alabama, you mentioned this new school Alabama team versus the old ones we saw with Derrick Henry and Trent Richardson when they were just better than you up front. So the other stuff didn't matter. The two things that surprised me the most, one is that Alabama, with spread personnel really, tried to revert back to Alabama the first half of the season that tried to be a murder ball pro-style offense with a quarterback that doesn't fit it. That was the most baffling thing to me, and deep down, I feel like the Bill O'Brien comments had something to do with that. I don't care what anybody says when it comes down to Jalen Moreau. It felt like he was trying to prove he was a pocket passer in a game where that's not his best element and not when Alabama's best. The second thing that surprised me was Michigan is the first complete team that I've seen. Outside of the SEC, sans Ohio State a couple times, there's really nobody else that I can think of that wasn't just really good in one element, but deficient in the other. What do I mean by that? It wasn't just that Michigan was as good or better than Alabama was up front. It was that they were as good or better than Alabama was up front, but athletic enough to cover in the back end when they couldn't get to the quarterback. We haven't seen that. Either it's been your skill guys aren't good enough and will eventually expose you there, or you're not good enough up front and eventually will expose you there. Those are the two things that, not that I picked Michigan to win it, I believe that their experience, which is the unteachable intangible, which when you look at Washington and Michigan, what do these two teams have in conference? That's similar in common? They're old. And when you're old, it translates because you cannot put experience into somebody. That's why I agree. Keeping your guys and the older guys and paying them the NIL money and using NIL through the transfer portal, I'd rather spend my hard-earned dollar, my blood and treasure on a proven commodity as opposed to a projection.
And what's funny, a lot of the guys who played in the Rose Bowl, they won't. But almost every guy that played a key role in the Rose Bowl, including J.J. McCarthy, Roman Wilson, Blake Corum, they can all come back and play again next year.
Oh, yeah. J.J. should, in
Not
my
all those
opinion.
guys will. But they could. There's one play, Jake, that I think summarizes kind of what you're saying about coverage in the back end that went unnoticed. And it was the drive where Alabama is essentially trying to run out the clock. And they throw a pass out into the flat. They catch Michigan in a blitz. All right. And so there is a guy open out in the flat there. I think it's Isaiah Bond. And there is one guy between him and basically Arcadia, California. Like he's running to Tuscaloosa. He's still running and the game is over. And Keon Sabb, whose name was barely called the entire game, he comes from depth. He's about 15 yards down the line of scrimmage. And he comes from depth 15 yards to tag. He gets there right at the moment the ball arrives. So we're talking an incredible amount of explosiveness, even to get into position. And then he's got the helmet on the sternum, textbook technique tackle in space. If you watch the all 22 of that, you will see there is nothing. Literally, there is the next blue shirt you will find between Isaiah Bond and the end zone are people sitting in the stands. And if Keon Sabb does not make that play, the game is over. You go and look at the winning touchdown for Blake Corum, and maybe my favorite stat, other than Jaden Daniels outrushed all but 8 teams in college football, I think it was, my favorite stat of this year is that the only 3 touchdowns Blake Corum has, touchdown runs of more than 5 yards, were the game-clinching touchdown against Penn State, the game-winning touchdown against Ohio State after Zach Zinner got hurt, and the game-winning touchdown in overtime against Alabama. How about that for a stat? All right, but if you go back and watch that run by Blake Corum, look at who ends up springing him. It's Carson Barnhart, who out on an island playing tackle against Chop Robinson and other guys, he just could not handle it. Down at guard, though, now he's at a position that he can play, and he makes the biggest block of the entire season on that play. And so that's another guy. You talked about overcoming adversity. You talked about athleticism. The athleticism that Keon Sabb shows there. Our number 6 receiver, Tyler Morris, outran the entire Alabama defense because of SEC speed or something. And then you look at Carson Barnhart, a guy who has been rightfully maligned with his play much of this year, ends up coming back, overcoming all of that, and throwing arguably the most important block any Michigan lineman had this entire season.
Without a doubt. And that was a great play. We broke that. David did a huddle up on that play, and it's great. He literally ran for Blake Corum. And whenever that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to run the route for the runner and be able to adjust like he did. Now, having said all that, Keon Sabb, great athlete. You guys were athletic enough to hang with Alabama. Congratulations. But I just want to know, David, who was the mayor's kid that y'all put in to catch that punt there at the end that almost blew it?
Someone's nephew. And I looked at you and I said, what are we doing? And you said, oh, well, you know for sure he's at least going to catch it.
Oh, I know. I was like, listen, I trust this more than anything I've ever seen in my life.
Of death.
We got away with it. It's in the past. Steve,
just like you drew it up.
Steve, I have very much appreciated your encouraging text messages over the past 4 to 6 weeks when it truly has felt like Michigan versus the world. You know, I didn't know if we'd see our boys get to a national championship. I certainly didn't know if we would see it, you know, with dealing with so much adversity in a year like this where it's felt like the NCAA against Jim Harbaugh, but we've arrived here. I have a million questions for you, but I just want to start with you. Please elaborate on the Rose Bowl. You just got back from there with your family. You watched 2 college football blue blood programs go at it. It came down to the final play. My first time in California as an 18-year-old kid was at the Rose Bowl. I got to experience Lowry Steakhouse and Sunset Boulevard and everything. Some people, Kirk Herbstreit, most prominently, has said the Rose Bowl should be the permanent site for college football's championship. Do you agree, and why?
100%. First class operation. Like I said, it's old California. It takes Americana and it embellishes it with bells and whistles and glitter and glitz, but it doesn't do it for the sake of tradition. Everything is first class. All the sight lines are phenomenal. It's played at the perfect time, the middle of the day, and then you're there for the sunset over the San Gabriel Mountains at the exact same time. And it's just... live sporting events are spoiled for me now. If the Lions ever get to a Super Bowl, man, I'm going to have to go Moses parting the Red Sea to be there for that. Okay. But short of that, I can't imagine any live sporting event the rest of my life just not being spoiled by what it was like being in that environment and at that game. And, years ago, Lloyd Carr's first game, David, was, you'll remember, was against Virginia in the Pigskin Classic. And I was at that game, and it was like the hottest day in Ann Arbor ever on August 26th. And we were down 17-0. And I was weighing about 400 pounds back then. And I'm like, it is too hot here for the big fella. And I start to eject. I start walking out of the stadium. We score a touchdown. I'm like, okay, that's our pity touchdown. We score another touchdown. And now my 400 pounds is sprinting to get back to my seat. All right. And I mean, I'm sitting like 20 feet from where Mercury Hayes caught that pass on the last play. Right.
Wow.
I almost made that mistake again. Traffic was terrible. I'm like, we're doomed. We're done. Amy and I are now looking at each other, middle-aged. My wife and I were like, we got to beat this traffic. We're heading out. And my 16-year-old son, Noah, looks at me and says, no, we ain't. We are staying to the end. All right. We are sticking this out. We're here to the end. He's more of a man than me. And he saved me from making a big mistake. And because I was actually sitting now about 20 yards from where Jake Thaw thought, let me catch a punt from the 4-yard line when I haven't played all game. And then how that walk-on kid was able to recover that fumble when 3 gigantic Alabama players are piling on him is miraculous to me. But that environment, what that was like, listening to the 2 fan bases when their fourth quarter songs came on, and when Mr. Brightside comes on, and then Dixieland Delight comes on right after that, and the behavior of the Michigan fans, they were polite at first and then tried to basically boo it down with chants of "Let's Go Blue." That kind of showed me that this fan base, after what it's experienced this year, David, has has lost a little bit of its uppityness and its snootiness and has got more of a serrated edge. It's maybe getting a little more comfortable wearing the black hat, and I'm all for it. Yeah,
I love that because the blue-collar mentality, Michigan's always played with that on the field. There's just been this era of pretentiousness sometimes with the fan base or just being a number.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
being
hard
the top three public school in the country. Like,
it's hard to be blue-collar while you're drinking a spritzer.
I completely understand. I get it. I get it.
Well, Steve, I mean, look, y'all beat Alabama. Congratulations. Let's talk about the real game that matters, and that's going to be against Washington. Give me your keys for Michigan. What does Michigan need to do to win this game? And I'm also going to add on, usually when you come on here, all right, you've always gone the other way on things. I'm pretty sure you picked Ohio State each time. Are you going to be in the same realm for this game? Give me your thoughts.
Great question.
This is a double full circle game for the program. The last time Michigan won a national championship was against a university from the state of Washington, Ryan Leaf in Washington State. And if you go back to the 2020 season when the program bottomed out, and if anybody was the coach other than the most decorated quarterback in school history, they would have been fired and should have been. It wasn't the loss to Sparty. I mean, there's been plenty of years where Sparty's beaten and upset great Michigan teams. It was the next week Michigan went on the road as a favorite to Indiana, a team they have not lost to since 1987. It was the longest streak of dominance within two teams in college football at the time. And Michael Penix threw all over them. Joe Milton threw up all over himself. And that was kind of the, this is going to be like Carl Lewis singing the national anthem kind of a season. And now Michigan has to go up against Michael Penix again. And now I sat down, I was in Ann Arbor in November for the Purdue game, and I had dinner with a couple of Michigan boosters and contacts I have. And they asked me, hey, who are you worried about, between us and the national championship? The team I mentioned was Washington. And here's why. The three receivers, you could do everything right, and they just arm punt it, man. Right as you're about barreling down on Michael Penix, he just arm punts it to one of those guys, and they beat you one-on-one. They're going to score points. All right. I mean, Kalen DeBoer, I think, is what now, 12-0, 13-0, something like that against ranked teams, which, by the way, I like because you're not going to go undefeated in your coaching career against ranked teams.
You're due to
starting to
drop
get to the
one.
point. The regression to the mean will happen. But I do think we will run on them. I do think we will look to control the clock. I think that we're going to need to score 30 plus to win the game. I think because we could do everything right, and Penix still throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think this is probably like a 34-27 kind of game. I do like Michigan in the game. I think they'll have a prohibitive home field advantage there in Houston, just from what I was told about advanced ticket sales there from schools that were looking to buy in anticipation of them being at that game. And I also get the sense sometimes it's just your year. Sometimes things just kind of fall into place. And you look at that last drive. Roman Wilson commits an incredibly dumb play with that block in the back on that Blake Corum conversion. He then comes right back the very next play and catches a ball through a deflection, with a 40-inch vertical in the air that sets up the winning touchdown. It's Blake Corum scoring right after Zach Zinner's injury, right? Sometimes it just feels like it is your year, and I think it just kind of feels like it's Michigan's year. And in the end, for all of the great talent Washington has on the outside, this is still a game of blocking and tackling, and I think Michigan is the superior team there.
Wow. Yeah, look, all those things you've listed, I mean, that's what we've talked about, all week, and we'll continue to talk about on Monday when we finally make our picks. But when I look at this game, to me, it's about two things for Michigan when you're going up against Michael Penix. It's limiting possessions, which makes him have to be more perfect, which lowers the margin for error. And then it's understanding that Washington, with those three guys, they're going to move the ball in between the 20s. You can't double everybody. I kind of liken it to having to defend the Warriors from 3 when they're cooking. You can't double Steph, Clay, and everybody they have that can shoot a 3. Like, at some point, you just got to hope they don't knock down a ton of them. But I've watched Washington be vulnerable to the run. That's Michigan's specialty. To be honest with you, I thought JJ played pretty poorly against Alabama. I think they won despite JJ outside of a couple plays. The trick play was unbelievably athletic that he caught. He made a couple throws there that were dropped, the slant at the end.
No, but he missed some easy throws. He missed some easy throws. The first play of the game, you work it all week. You knew what it was. How do you not throw the outbreaking route? Not only that, you throw it to the sinking defender who made a smash call. But that's neither here nor there. Michigan's ability to run the ball is going to run the clock. But when Washington gets in the red zone,
How do you accrue? How do you limit space? You get them closer to the red zone.
Yeah.
That's why it's easier to defend teams in the red zone. There is less space. There's less room and grass for them to manipulate, regardless of how strong Michael Penix's arm is. So if you can hold Washington to a field goal in this game when they get in the red zone, that's massive, because I think Michigan is going to be able to line up. Michigan gotten way too much 11 personnel for my liking last game. I thought some of the elements of the game plan were good, but I'm watching Alabama line up in 12 personnel a lot in the first half, and Michigan line up in 11. I think Michigan's going to live in 12 personnel this game and live in heavy personnel this game and control the clock, limit them to field goals at least half the time in the red zone, and you win. I think that's
ironically, Michigan had the most success against Alabama in 11 personnel.
Well, they were in it. I mean,
and I could not believe that was the case. Even the huddle up play that we broke down, the overtime play, it was technically 22 personnel, even though it looked like 13 personnel because the fullback was lined up in a wing position. But I thought for sure if Michigan wins that game, it's because they hit Colston Loveland in the seams and the wideouts are going to be.
You know why I think that
bracketed.
happened, Dave? I think that Nick Saban did something Michigan did not anticipate, in that they put their smaller, quicker guys on those tight ends out of fear of those guys beating them over the middle, like what we did against Ohio State.
And still played man.
And I think that. And and I think that was something Michigan did not anticipate. That was the one good coaching move Alabama did before kickoff. Once we got into the game, I thought Michigan outcoached Alabama.
I did too. I did too,
which
is that's something new as well. It's not just a physical component about having the guys, but also coaching in those big moments, which, I mean, that brings me to Jim Harbaugh. You know, the national narrative is so conflicted when it comes to him, Steve. When I see these networks like ESPN talk about Jim Harbaugh, somehow it's, you know, he's a quirky, eccentric head coach who can't win the big game, but also simultaneously he's the most sought-after guy for any NFL job the second that it comes open. Even to the point, Steve, that less than 24 hours after the biggest win of his career, the headline is, you know, Jim Harbaugh will obviously be the next head coach at the Los Angeles Chargers or the Chicago Bears, even though I don't think they've done enough due diligence to realize Kevin Warren is now with the Bears. But, you know, they can't even give the guy his due on the biggest win and talk about the championship game that's coming up. You know, what do you say here? Even before we play out the championship game, what is the future going to look like for not only Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, but also J.J. McCarthy?
I was told by a little birdie yesterday that Michigan will match any, and it was emphasized, any dollar amount from the NFL.
Even with Ward Manuel as the AD.
Yes, I was told that by somebody who would know and probably know, and I know knows Ward, as a matter of fact. Now, I would kind of like to see Michigan instead spend some more of that money on NIL, but that's a topic for a different conversation. But I don't think it's going to be about money for Jimmy. I don't. I think it really comes down to he's got, first of all, he's 60, but he still has young kids. And does he want to, do him and the wife, do him and Sarah want to move them across the country to different schools and everything else? What's the health status of his two parents now, both in their 80s? All right. Are they up for another move? Do they want to be separated from them? And then juxtapose that with, if Jim climbs the summit here, there's only been two coaches ever that have won a Super Bowl and a national championship. Barry Switzer and Jimmy Johnson are the only two. Yep. So he would be the third, okay? How much does that weigh into these other family concerns that will be that will be prevalent as well? Because he's not in the position a normal 60-year-old man is in, where his kids are grown, he's kind of do his own thing. He still has school-aged young children at home. And so you're still talking about uprooting the family like you would if he was 40 or 45 years old. And so I think those are all considerations. And if you know anything about Jimmy at all, man, trying to predict what he is going to do is a point of diminishing returns. I just don't think it's going to be about money. I think for the Chargers, it's going to be about this is traditionally been a meddling and a persnickety, cheap ownership. Are they going to give Jim control? They're going to let him make personnel decisions. You know, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they're so desperate to win now, the Spanoses are, that they will. I don't know the answer to that. But those are the things that Jimmy is going to demand. And then there are also the demands of the family too, and what they want to do at this stage of life. Well, if he's not the coach, Sharon Moore will be the coach.
Sharon Moore, so you think Sharon Moore gets elevated? I mean, it makes sense, a natural successor now. Okay, so what about Jay?
He's already done it.
Who else can we hire?
He's got the best experience ever. He's already done it.
Hey,
he's already done it in the biggest game.
First order of business to me is keep Jesse Minter. Man, what a coach. And you were talking about Jesse Minter long before he got hired.
Yeah, I know.
I think the NFL... I think the NFL is going to offer him a blank check is what I think will happen there.
So what about J.J. McCarthy? The three of us just had this conversation yesterday. The three of us are of the opinion that J.J. McCarthy needs to return to Michigan. He needs another year to bake, especially in what has become the most historic and deep quarterback class really that we've ever seen. Some of his peers that I think J.J. McCarthy may even be a half step behind, like Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck, are going to return. What say you?
I think that JJ has every measurable you'd want. 6'3" size, arm strength. I think that mobility. I think in the interview room, people are going to say, "Holy cow, where have you been my entire life?" All right, that he is an absolute leader of men. My concern for him as an NFL prospect, and when I was growing up, I wanted to be Mel Kiper Jr. when I grew up. All right, so I'm a bit of an amateur, poor man's draftnik. My concern with JJ, if I forget that I'm wearing a Michigan pullover. The one common denominator of guys who typically fail with those traits in the NFL, if they're not, if they don't have emotional issues like a Ryan Leaf had, that's a unique situation. Otherwise, it is that the footwork and the fundamentals create a lack of consistent accuracy, and the idea that you're going to be able to correct that and improve that at the highest level with the tightest windows. There's just not too many cases of that, guys. There's not too many cases of guys who, as rookies, were 58% passers, and 5 years later they're 68% passers. All right, so I think that's my concern, is that the footwork is inconsistent. The amount of plays, like the play he made to Khalil Mullings early in the game, out of pocket, phenomenal. In pocket, that's where your money is made in the NFL. You can be a Jared Goff, man, where probably at least one of us could beat him in a 40-yard dash. But if you put a pocket around him, he can throw into extremely tight windows. That is something that JJ still has not consistently put on tape for the NFL. And that's why I agree with you that he would be better off with another year of development. On the other hand, I can't see a guy winning a national championship and returning too. Who does that?
I mean, Stetson, I guess, but that's such a different, he had such a different path that to me is an anomaly. I agree with you, but I think there's a couple anomalies and a couple circumstances that lend toward JJ coming back. Like I said, the class depth from the quarterback position in this one is absolutely nuts. I mean, I'm looking at JJ right now. As much as I love him, I'm taking Cam Ward ahead of JJ McCarthy right now. I am. That's just my opinion with his skill set.
Probably you're going to take Michael Penix ahead of him. You're going to take Drake May ahead of him. You're going to take Caleb Williams ahead of him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bo Nix, I'm going to take ahead of him. Because I think, in my opinion, J.J. McCarthy is very similar, actually, to Bo Nix. I think that's a comp that enough people don't make. I think Bo is further as a passer. Bo Nix has also played college football for
3 more years. Yeah.
So when I look at J.J., I think there's a difference between a guy like Joe Milton, who I don't think will ever become a great passer. I don't think he has feel. I don't think he has the ability to throw the changeup. Some guys are closers. They go in there, they throw 102, they face 3-4 batters, they get out. You don't want them throwing 6 innings because they got one move. It's Jonah Hill on the dance floor in Superbad. That's the only move he's got. But I think JJ has the ability to become an intricate passer. I see some throws where he's able to take some off. You can tell his arm's gotten stronger, right? He's flexing around sometimes this year. You go back to the Maryland game. He's trying to make throws, the one he made in the Ohio State game with the guy with his back turned. That was just insane. I like that gunslinger mentality, but I feel like he can grow as a passer, and I feel like coming back a year, and you said it best, Steve, his ability in the pocket. J.J. McCarthy makes his best throws when he panics. You can't live like that in the NFL. When it's going haywire, you can't etch-a-sketch your way through an NFL season. We've seen guys try and do it. Johnny Manziel can't do it. You're not going to be able to do it, buddy. And he had a lot more problems than just that. But I do think if JJ comes back, I think the growth potential of another year of fundamentally getting better with his feet, with his hips, with his frame, he can throw off platform. We've seen. I think his skill set, Steve, he could end up being a guy that goes to the NFL and probably needs to sit.
Oh, he needs to be in a good situation.
Maybe a couple of years, but get in the right situation. I think he can be fine.
If you think about coming back, by the way, he would be the unquestioned Heisman Trophy favorite all offseason.
sure, I agree.
The amount of NIL that goes along with that. Look at all the ads Caleb Williams did this year, for example. I think he's probably on the cover of the new NCAA football game. Remember, the last one had a Michigan quarterback on the cover. So you bookend that. You put another Michigan quarterback on the cover. There's a lot of NIL potential there. The opportunity to be a Michigan captain, I know for a fact that is something very meaningful to him. And then I think the opportunity to go 4-0 against Ohio State. So there would be financial incentive and career incentive that would make him, you're talking about a guy that would be a legendary mythological level of figure as a Michigan football player for the winningest program of all time. I hope you're right. As long as we can, if it's Jimmy or JJ, I'm okay. Because I trust Sharon Moore to at least be able to manage this in the short term with what we've already seen. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, pay for play is coming standard across the board.
Sure.
Formal relationships with whether they're employees or represented or there's rampant revenue sharing that I think is going to even the playing field of some of this. Okay, in terms of the Athletic article this week of the amount of inducements, which is a hell of a lot more than cheeseburgers that kids are just openly saying they're being offered right now. I think that's going to be standard operating procedure here in the next 3 to 5 years. So if you told me Sharon Moore, based on what he's done, could manage the program to get to that point where the rules and everything are a little bit more uniform and there's less variance, and now the institutional advantages that a Michigan has can come more to the forefront as opposed to the black market that exists now, I'm okay with that.
So one more quick question on J.J. McCarthy that only you can answer here, because my affiliation with Michigan football only begins in the summer of 2005 when they believed enough in me to offer me a scholarship. I did get to play with Chad Henne and Denard Robinson. But if J.J. McCarthy moves forward and wins this national championship, is he the greatest quarterback in Michigan history?
No question. Yeah. It's not even a debatable point. I mean, right now you would be looking at guys like Elvis Gerbach. Jim Harbaugh would be my pick. Then you'd probably, this has never been a quarterback, and Denard would be in there. People are going to remember years from now, Denard's going to be more fondly remembered. He was essentially a one-man program. Without him, Michigan football would have had losing seasons almost the entirety of that era. He basically kept this program relevant all by himself during that period. But what you're looking at now is a guy that will have both the statistics and the accomplishments. I don't think there's any question. He would be the standard by which all Michigan quarterbacks would be measured moving forward.
I think you're right. And what's funny enough, the name you didn't mention there, Chad Henne, the biggest knock against him is he didn't beat the Buckeyes. And I include myself because I was there during that tenure. So, he didn't beat the Buckeyes. But if you just gave me one to pick out of the bunch on one final drive, who's going to bang the post route and hit it, I'll put Chad Henne in there, man.
Hey, I tell you, how cool is it that maybe the two most famous quarterbacks, if Michigan's able to win the national championship, will be at Michigan at the same time together? Jim Harbaugh, the former quarterback, now coach, J.J. McCarthy, obviously the quarterback. And real quick, Steve, has anybody else made this connection? There was a framed picture of J.J. McCarthy just during the game. This dude looks just like, and I'm trying to remember the actor's name, he looks just like the kid from the Goonies. Just like him. The dude who played Rudy and Samwise from Lord of the Rings. Look
you're
at
talking about Sean Astin.
Oh my God. But it's like Goonies. Look at Sean Astin as a kid in Goonies and look at J.J. McCarthy. I'm just telling you, it's actually eerie.
Good call.
It's actually eerie. And I
got a chance to meet Sean Astin several years ago. He filmed a baseball movie here in Iowa. I got a chance to meet and interview Samwise Ganges, and as a Lord of the Rings fanatic, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Was he cool? Was he a cool dude?
He was, man, just a regular guy, Nice. And here's the thing. I suspected it talking to him. I could tell he was a little bit more righty than maybe you would expect the average Hollywood actor to be.
I think a lot of them. Are, Steve, to be honest.
Just in the way he was framing his responses, there's kind of a righty dar, like gaydar, and I could kind of pick it up a little bit. And now he stars in all these Christian movies. So there you go. My instincts were correct. Yes.
He's like, listen, I love doing this baseball movie. Immigration's out of control. It's like,
so subtle.
So subtle. Well, Steve, man, again, good luck on Monday. We're going to be live streaming the game here at Crane & Company. We know you're a super busy guy. Congratulations again on Nefarious. I know you got some other stuff working in that realm as well. Fantastic stuff at the Steve Deace Show, man, and we always appreciate you spending some time with us.
Anytime, guys. Really appreciate it. Love getting a chance to talk football, especially when we're good. So thank you, and go Blue.
Are you going? Are you going to the game?
I'm not, man. I at some point I got to get back to work, and that's for me this week.
That's
Plus,
how we feel. Yeah.
what could ever top the Rose Bowl? And I've got the 75-inch in the man cave. That's the best seat in the house.
That's exactly right. And guess what? When I'm in the man cave, I get to go use my bathroom. When I get up and go get a beer, it's not $30.
Two holes in the wall.
Yes.
Yeah, and one.
And we won.
That was the greatest way to explain that Michigan game. There's 2 holes in the wall, and we won.
If you're not going, then you better have our live stream pulled up next to the game, buddy.
Oh, Steve will be there.
We're going to be live.
Steve, we appreciate it, man. Good luck. Good luck to Michigan. Good luck to Washington. Thank you, my friend.